Hey everyone, today we'll be looking at someone who had a very interesting life story indeed. Gabrielle dEstrées came from a family of women who were courtesans, and after the French king Henri IV fell in love with her, she had great fortune in becoming the maîtresse en titre, or official chief mistress to the king. Yet, what differentiates her from other royal mistresses is the fact that Henri was willing to marry her, but before he could, tragedy would strike Gabrielle. Gabrielle was born around the year 1573 at either the Château de la Beaudasière in Mont-Louis-sur-Loire in Touraine, or at the Château de Couffres in Picardy. Her father was Antoine dEstrées, Baron Boullenois, Vicomte de Soissons-Bercy, Marquis of Couffres and Governor of the Île-de-France, and her mother was Françoise Babou, La Beaudasière. Gabrielle's mother had served as lady-in-waiting to Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, when she became the wife of King François II. Françoise had many lovers right after she married Gabrielle's father, but later settled down to a period of maternal fecundity, bearing 10 children in 10 years. After that, Françoise took a lover and created a scandal by leaving her family. Following this, she bore another daughter out of wedlock, and then was promptly murdered in her bed, along with her lover, by some dissatisfied tenants. Growing up, Gabrielle was given an education, but she didn't have an aptitude for it. She was not well trained in comportment, but did learn a great deal about feminine wiles and the ways of gallantry. Gabrielle and her 6 sisters engaged in gross sexual misconduct and were infamous for their roles as courtesans. Gabrielle's beauty was remarked upon by many. She was tall with a graceful walk, had blonde hair and blue eyes, with a perfectly pale complexion. Early on, she attracted the attention of the Grand Equerry of France, Roger de Saint-Lary, Duke of Bellegarde, and promptly became his lover. At this point in time, the heir to the throne of France was Henri de Bourbon, the Protestant king of Navarre, who was married to Margaret of Valois. When King Henry III was assassinated on the 2nd of August 1589, he named Henri as his heir. But it wasn't an easy task for him to claim the crown. He was forced to fight the Catholic League, who were dead set against the Protestant king. In November 1590, as the siege of Paris dragged on, Bellegarde conspired to introduce Gabrielle to Henri. They travelled to Kiev, where Gabrielle lived, and Henri immediately developed an intense passion for her. Legend says she held out in giving herself to him until January of 1591, during the siege of Chartres. Then, by April of 1591, their relationship was acknowledged as official, although Bellegarde may still have been her lover. Early on during her relationship with the king, Gabrielle's father had arranged a marriage to the widower Nicolas d'Armeval, Lord of Liancourt, Baron Benet. Previously, Bellegarde had also shown interest in marrying Gabrielle, but gave up once the king had gotten involved. Gabrielle was dead set against the marriage, but she couldn't defy her father. Even so, the relationship with the king was now fully blooming. Despite her marriage, by 1593, for reasons unknown, Gabrielle became singularly loyal and devoted to the king, and began accompanying him on campaign, even while pregnant, living in his tent near the battlefield. She was practical and intelligent, making sure his clothes were clean, pounding them with rocks when she ran out of soap. She ensured he had a good meal after a day's battle, and even handled his day-to-day diplomatic and political correspondence. Their relationship was passionate and full of love, with Henri trusting her fully, telling her his most important secrets, and following her advice. When they weren't together, Henri wrote to her regularly, yet they did try to be in each other's company as much as they could. On one occasion, Henri was worried about her life being in danger, and insisted she return to Paris, but Gabrielle refused, replying that she was only happy in his presence. Throughout their liaison, Henri inundated Gabrielle with gifts, making her extremely wealthy. It may have been about this time that Henri considered making her his queen. Gabrielle's marriage could be easily annulled by the French clergy, but the king's annulment would need papal approval. Gabrielle convinced Henri that the Kingdom of France was worth changing his religion for, and on July 25, 1593, Henri converted to Catholicism at Saint Denis, famously saying, "Paris is worth a mass." That same year, the military campaign to take control of Paris was becoming more successful for Henri, and the Parliament of Paris recognized him as king. He was solidly on the throne and was crowned at Chartres on the 27th of February 1594. On the 15th of September 1594, he made a triumphal entry into Paris. This was Gabrielle's first public appearance as a member of the royal entourage. She rode in a magnificent open litter before the king, wearing a black satin dress which was adorned all over with white and was covered in pearls and sparkling gems. It must have made quite an impression. It was the only time someone preceded him in any fashion, and was clearly a public statement of her elevated status. A few months prior, Gabrielle had given birth to a son, Caesar, Duke of Vendôme, in June of 1594. On January 7th, 1595, Henri had Gabrielle's marriage to Lioncourt annulled by forcing her husband to admit he was impotent in court. The next day, Henri decreed that Gabrielle was to be attended to by a court, and a suite of rooms was prepared for her at the Louvre. Henri officially recognized and legitimized Caesar in a testament which he had validated by the Parliament of Paris. In the same document, he recognized Gabrielle as the child's mother and as a subject most worthy of his friendship. Basically, Henri made the Parliament officially endorse Gabrielle's position as his mistress, granting her the title of titulary mistress of His Majesty, King of France. Gabrielle gave birth to two other children, Catherine Henriette de Bourbon, who was born in 1596, and Alexandre de Bourbon, born in 1598. Henri later recognized these two children as legitimate. In 1596, Henri ennobled Gabrielle, giving her the title Marchioness of Monceau, which included the Château Royal de Monceau. Gabrielle continued the beautification work on Monceau, which had been started by Queen Catherine de Medici, along with constructing new buildings. In 1597, further titles came as Henri made Gabrielle the Duchess of Beaufort and later gave her the title of Duchess of Verneuil. Henri was very public with his displays of affection with Gabrielle, enough for it to be commented on. One chronicler was disgusted by the behaviour of Henri and Gabrielle at a masked ball at Fontainebleau. Well, they kept raising their masks to kiss each other. During another ball in Paris, Henri received a dispatch that the Spanish had made a surprise attack and captured the city of Amiens. Henri was ready to leave immediately, and Gabrielle went to her personal treasury in the Louvre and gave Henri 50,000 pieces of gold to help pay for the troops and provisions. While Henri raised troops, Gabrielle visited members of the nobility to ask for donations to the cause. She managed to collect an additional 250,000 écus. She also took her most lavish pieces of jewellery to be pawned with the richest banker in Paris. During another particularly fierce battle, the French troops were surprised by a unit of Austrian soldiers. As the French fled the scene, Gabrielle came out to yell at the top of her lungs for the troops to continue to fight, even though cannonballs were flying all around her and the Austrians were dangerously close. Henri rode up to her and ordered her to be picked up by a horseman and taken to the rear of the camp. It should be noted that Henri used Gabrielle as a chief diplomat and relied on her female friends from families of the Catholic League to garner peace. In March of 1596, he sanctioned seats on his council for Gabrielle and her sister Catherine. On the council, she helped form laws, received ambassadors, and worked very hard to end the religious civil war. She used her charm and gifts of persuasion and conciliation to arbitrate complex problems. She was even allowed to have direct communication with the Pope. She used this as a weapon to convince the Pope to officially accept Henri's conversion to Catholicism, and eventually she succeeded. In 1597, Henri made peace with the Catholic opposition. He could now work to reconcile supporters of the two religions. After the peace, there was another triumphal entry into Paris. Gabrielle sat next to the king and was waited on by the Duchess of Villars at the celebratory feast. As the Duchess presented her with dainty dishes, she used one hand to select her food and offered the other to the king to kiss. In 1598, Henri signed the Edict of Nantes, giving the Protestant Huguenots certain rights in an effort to promote civil unity between Protestants and Catholics. Gabrielle and her Protestant sister, Catherine, worked to overcome the objections of powerful Catholics and Huguenots to strengthen compliance with the edict. Henri was exceedingly impressed with her efforts. In the 1590s, Gabrielle was in charge of a large household that included 83 ladies and gentlemen, 17 crown officials, and over 200 servants. Gabrielle was the regular recipient of lavish gifts from foreign monarchs and French nobility. Some of the gifts she received included a large diamond and sapphire brooch mounted in gold from Queen Elizabeth I of England, 24 silver goblets from Archduke Ferdinando de Medici of Tuscany, an emerald pin from a French politician, a jar of refined perfume oil from a noblewoman, and 2 stags from a courtier which he had just killed in the hunt. On November 17, 1598, Gabrielle moved into the Queen's apartments at the Louvre and began to be attended to as if she was the Queen. She was pregnant for a 4th time, and Henri wanted the child to be legitimate, which probably impacted his decision to marry her. On the 20th of January 1599, Henri personally wrote to the Pope, begging for an annulment. In February of 1599, during a festival at the Louvre, Henri gave Gabrielle his coronation ring, promising to marry her. He then sent nobles and cardinals to the Vatican to plead his case for an annulment of his marriage to Marguerite and permission to remarry. Although Henri had legitimized Gabrielle's 2 sons, they were born out of wedlock and would not have been considered legitimate heirs to the throne. But Henri seemed more than willing to do this, even though it would have created a succession crisis. Unfortunately, the French aristocracy bore a grudge against Gabrielle because of her relationship with Henri. Cruel pamphlets were circulated, blaming her for many of the ills and misfortunes of society and calling her a whore. Gabrielle's household was very expensive to keep up, and some resented the expenses she incurred. With Henri's decision to marry her, attacks on Gabrielle became even more vehement. Clergymen then began preaching sermons against her. Pope Clement VIII was adverse to Henri's plan to repudiate Marguerite, even though she had long been separated from the king. Clement worried about the possibility of Henri's children from an adulterous relationship, causing a succession crisis. But eventually, it looked like Clement was about to issue the annulment. The wedding of Gabrielle and Henri was to take place on Easter Sunday in 1599. Gabrielle was 5 months pregnant. She had sailed through her first 3 pregnancies with excellent health, but this time it was different. She didn't feel well, was peevish and fretful. She suffered nightmares and had a gloomy sense of foreboding. 3 days before the wedding, she travelled by barge to Paris to prepare, while Henry remained at Fontainebleau. When she departed, she burst into tears and held on to him. She may have known it was the last time she would see him. In Paris, she had dinner at the house of a friend where she had a lemon or lemonade. The next afternoon, she was in labour and was in dreadful pain. The child was dead in her womb, and the doctors worked to remove him. During this, she had convulsions. Then, her face is said to have turned black, and her mouth twisted to the side. Even though there were 2 surgeons, 3 apothecaries and a priest in attendance, Gabrielle died, giving birth to the stillborn son. Apparently, those friends who saw her were so shocked by her appearance that they fainted. Due to the strangeness of her death, rumours of poison were swift to appear, but the doctors concluded she had been killed by a corrupt lemon. But the symptoms are more in line with eclampsia, a condition during pregnancy that causes fatal increases in blood pressure. Another suggestion for cause of death is placenta previa. After her death, servants stole rings from her fingers, and even her father took royal furniture she had ordered for her apartments as queen. Henri was at the Château of Fontainebleau when he received news of her illness. As he made his way to her on April 10th, he learned that Gabrielle had died. He was devastated by her death. He wore black in mourning for her, which etiquette and tradition did not allow a French king to do. Henri gave her a royal funeral. Her coffin was accompanied by many princes, princesses, and nobles to the church of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois in Paris, where a requiem mass was celebrated. She was then interred in the church of Notre-Dame-la-Royale de Moisbuisson Abbey in Saint-Ouen-l'Homme. After the funeral, the wax effigy used in the ceremony was propped up in a small chamber off of Henry's apartments in the Louvre. Each day, it was dressed in a new gown, and Henri would visit the figure for many years. Gabrielle is the only mistress Henri was entirely faithful to. He soon realised declaring his sons by her as his heirs would be a calculated mistake. He went on a womanizing spree and started courting Henriette d'Entragues, making large payments to her. She would replace Gabrielle as his official mistress. He also offered marriage to Marie de Medici after his first marriage was annulled in December of 1599. She would become the next Queen of France in November of 1600 and mother of his heir, the future King Louis XIII. Then in 1610, Henri IV would also die in tragic circumstances after a Catholic zealot named François Ravaillac stabbed him while in his royal carriage. Thank you so much for watching this video on Gabrielle dEstrées. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave me a like and a comment down below. And if you're new, why not subscribe? If you have any suggestions, be sure to leave them in the comments, or you can send them to my email and Instagram, which are both in the descriptions. And I hope you have notifications on to take all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.